We'd like
Sounds good.
to welcome everybody here and thank you in particular to Susie Katt for being with us. I'm curriculum coordinator at LPS for K through 2, and she is speaking on productive math struggle this evening, a continuing discussion from January from her presentation, and a little bit more on those 6 actions that you can take in your classroom to initiate that productive struggle. And then we'll do some breakouts as well and enter into the conversation a little bit more. So thank you, Susie, for being here with us again. And without further ado, we'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. Well, welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here tonight. And like Stephanie said, this is kind of a continuation of my presentation from January. Actually, it is a continuation. We're going to just spend the next hour or so thinking about this whole idea of productive struggle in mathematics. And some of the things I want you to really think about how maybe these activities or certain ideas can be adapted to your respective grade level or context. I know some of you are maybe in different roles, and so I want this to be meaningful for you. And so, like Stephanie said, we're going to have some breakout rooms. It's going to be the mixture of me kind of doing some sharing, and then you maybe doing some reflecting or some participation discussions with each other to make some connections to your own work. So just a couple things. I just want to welcome all of you, and excited to see. It's like I love this whole math circle because we get people from all over the state, and like I said, in different contexts. And I'm really just grateful. I love to listen and learn and collaborate with all of you. It is a follow-up, and some of you either were in here or in this session in January, or I know in some other sessions that I've done this same thing. So I just want to do a little disclaimer that I'm going to revisit some of those ideas because I know some of you have not been joining us. And so I wanted to make sure that we all kind of had some of these foundational ideas, but then also have the opportunity to dive in, here's my diver, a little bit deeper. So hopefully you find this time to kind of maybe go into some of those ideas and really think a little more deeply about them than you were previously. So if some of you have listened to this before and say, gosh, you know what, I feel like this is, I kind of know some of this stuff, then I would not feel offended if you have other things to do. So I know how lives are busy and lots of stuff going on. So just a couple things I'd like to start out is when we often think of the word struggle, we often associate these kinds of feelings or these kinds of pictures come to our minds as adults, right? When we think about the emotions in these pictures, we think about frustration, we think about loss of hope or anger, discouragement, maybe even annoyance. We really have this negative connotation on the idea of struggle. However, when we talk to young students or elementary students about struggle, they often see it in a different way. And they're going to relate struggle to that context or life event. And so I just wanted to share these again, because I think these are really, really kind of interesting. Is when we asked this, so these came from a real life classroom. And some students said, well, this student said, struggle can be frustrating or hard at times. The rest of their statements about struggle were overwhelmingly positive. And they said they're just a natural part of learning. So we really need to just run with this idea and capitalize on this, and help our students really think about how that struggling really does help and is an essential part of learning. And not only in the classroom, but to all aspects of their life. So couple things that really influence how I thought about struggle, and you maybe have very similar feelings, is when I grew up, I was taught not to ask any questions. I was just taught this is the way you do math. Basically, I remember my 6th grade algebra teacher up at the board showing me how to do it, and I just copied along like, little copious notes and didn't really understand any of it. I remember those tricks that we were taught, and this one, I don't know why it sticks out to me because it is so silly, but bigger bottom, better borrow. Okay, so those of you who teach 2nd grade, you're probably thinking, oh gosh, yeah, there's some tricks that we've done with that of, oh, when do I need to regroup or kinds of things. So when I went to college, and I didn't really, I remember my most vivid memory was all about manipulatives and having to do this big project about place value blocks and how I might use those in the classroom. It really didn't prepare me for struggle or how when kids do struggle. And then when I got into the classroom, I really had this idea of that when I struggled, or when my students struggled, it was my fault, right? So it was like I wasn't doing a good enough job, because if I did my job well, then they shouldn't be struggling. And also just kind of thought, like struggle happened in the moment and all this kind of stuff, that I just thought struggle just happened by chance. Well, lots of things that I've learned differently, and that how this whole idea of struggle doesn't just happen by chance. And with a couple colleagues, John and Kevin, we really kind of dove into these whole ideas and came up with these actions. And these actions that we take that are very intentional actions for on our part of teachers, and then how we can think about how this struggle will play out in a classroom. And again, when most of us work with elementary students, or in some shape or form, and how critical that is that we start the idea really early on that struggle is really important, and that this is a part of natural of learning is in mathematics. I didn't get that learn that lesson until I was in primarily math, right? So I was like 35 or even closer to 40. So all those kind of ideas I think are just really important, and we're going to dive into these a little bit. So we've got a value struggle, and like I said before, most of us, we think about an importance of value of struggle in our daily lives or activities. We can relate to that, or how we've also supported our loved ones through their struggles. This one really hits home to me, as I have a baseball player, and every time he steps up to the plate, lately he's been striking out. And so what is that? And so how to help support him through that, and not get overly frustrated, but help him work through those struggles. He's out actually right now hitting off a tee. So we'll see, maybe it's kind of those things of learning how to work through those and some of that stuff. So, but we also think about, we all probably fell off our wobbly bikes to get back on them as we learned how to ride a bike. So that struggle was really an important piece of learning. So it's important that we embrace, like I said, that same struggle when we value teaching mathematics. As Herbert and Gross says, it's a necessary component of when we teach and learn mathematics. When we capitalize on this productive struggle, it leads to long-term benefits. And then when students are, they can use what they learned when they encounter novel problem situations. And then, like we said, every student needs opportunity to struggle as their essential life skills. They can apply that to beyond the classroom. So why does it matter? Research has informed us over and over again that our instruction in the United States is not characterized as promoting productive struggle. Studies have really uncovered that teachers in the United States often don't require students to do the thinking. We often turn math into this set of procedures or tricks and teach those shortcuts, like bigger bottom, better borrow. You have to think about that one. It was a tongue twister. And so we do this though because we want our students to be successful, and we feel like that in the short term that will help them, get them, and lead to those results. However, and then like we said before, we think often and take that their struggles as a result of our inadequate instruction. And so what we do is then we turn in and we rescue, and we'll talk a little bit about that rescuing. And we swoop in and we take over because we don't want to see our students become frustrated. So that's what typically happens in our classrooms. So I'm not going to go through this list, but there's behaviors that we can keep in mind as teachers that are strong indication of the health and the well-being of a classroom that has productive struggle. And just knowing these behaviors is really important. And because excuse me, I'm gonna go back. So knowing these behaviors, and also there's like student behaviors, that there's this cause and effect relationship between what a teacher does and what students do. And here's just those student behaviors. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those, and just wanted to add those. And I will, Stephanie, I forgot to share that we will put these PowerPoint notes up somewhere so that everybody has access to them. So here's the time. I'm going to get to a breakout session really quick. We're going to go in for, Stephanie, let's just do about for 2 minutes. So I think that'll be enough time. And I will copy this and put it in the chat. So I want you just to together talk about this whole idea and this statement that you see here and how that relates to your work. So I will put this in the chat, and Stephanie's going to, there you go. And then Stephanie's going to put you into a breakout room. And then when she's just going to close the room so we come back, so we don't have that waiting period, so we can all come back together. So Stephanie, if you would like to do that, that'd be great.
Okay, looks like we're ready to go. So we'll open all those rooms.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you. I apologize that was very abrupt, but hopefully you got a little bit of time to think about that. And I want to keep moving because I've got some other breakouts. So hopefully then you can go back and revisit and say hi to those friends. So, but I think this is a good quote to really think about. And however, you know, I know we were talking in our group, it does present some challenges. However, the importance of that all students really do have that opportunity. So, all right, so we're going to move on to action 2, foster identity. And
you're not sharing screen, Susie.
Oh gosh, sorry. See, told you. I'm like, this is too many things to navigate here. There we go. Are you there? Perfect. Can you see it now? Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So this whole idea of identity, that math identity is the disposition and deeply held belief that people develop in their ability to participate and perform effectively in mathematics. And we know that even our kindergartners who walk in our buildings and our classrooms have these individual and unique characteristics and identities. And they have, and all of us have varying attitudes and experiences that shape who we are, and especially in terms of mathematics. And these identities change over time. I know mine has really evolved. And so we can't really fully learn about our students' math identities through one single activity. So it's important that we engage in these activities throughout the year to gain a better understanding of who our students are and also how they evolve over time. And when we really know our students, we can better engage them and better support them and foster the thinking and productive struggle. So I just want to share this because I know that some of you haven't got to see this, and this is one of my favorite activities. And I have some new, I'm going to move this here. I have some new examples. So this is the math emoji activity, and displaying a series of emojis and explaining, and I kind of kicked it off with some second graders about how just last week about how, like, actually I talked about working on my dissertation, right, and all these different emotions I went through and how those emojis evoked or kind of told the story. And so asking the students, when you think of math, which of these emojis would you choose and why? So, oops, my computer. So I was going to have you draw, but we're going to move on because we don't have time. But I want you to pinpoint which emoji you think best describes yourself. And I'd love to find out, but like I said, we don't have enough time. But so having the students then take a moment and sketch what emoji they feel best describes math, and then explain them. So here's some things that and you know, some of their students' responses are just what we anticipate. These 3 students were example of what the teacher expected. She said, you know, this student right here has, one of them has a joy of learning, obviously. This one is gifted and does extension work outside of the classroom. And I don't know if you can see it, it says, I feel exhausted after math because it is boring. And so that really showed her, like, yeah, I need to kind of continue to engage him. And this little girl says, I feel scared because I think I might get something wrong. Well, there's parental pressures at home, and this is just and she brings this to the classroom, and a lot of this baggage of she feels this pressure to always be right in mathematics. So these were right on. What's always interesting is the teachers that I've done this in their classrooms, they're like, you know, gosh, there's so many things that I've uncovered that I had no clue about. And here's one. What I feel about math is that I'm not really good at it. I wish I was better at it. That's what I feel. Doesn't that just break your heart? You know, that little emoji. And this one's, I feel nervous about math because sometimes I have to tell what I did and it didn't make sense. And I thought, wow, you know, just the articulation of these young students through these emojis really gives us a better understanding of who they are. So it's been a big hit, and you know, you can modify this in different ways. I really want to try it with adults, and so I wanted to try it tonight, but I know time's ticking. So you might reflect on how might you utilize this activity in your own context. You might do it with teammates, as adults. You might do it with your students. It really is, I think, it's just an eye opener, and it takes 15 minutes, if even that, to do this activity. So I'm anxious for these teachers who I worked with recently to go back and do this again at the end of the year and see if how those feelings might have evolved or changed. So learning journals, again, are a great way to know your students. You know, young students can draw pictures, older students can write, but there's just some sentence starters. You know, it just taking the time, or even just say, hey, I want you to think about this, and I want you to whisper this in my ear on the way down to the bathroom. You just get to know your students as mathematicians. So lots of great ways. We also have superheroes in our classroom, and these are actually brand hot off the press. I just stole these pictures last week from a classroom, and I just actually got this book today. It was perfect timing, so I ordered it, and I don't know if it's the book, the Hidden Figures book. A teacher was talking to me. She said, Susie, that book is great. She goes, for so many reasons. However, one of the neat things in this book is it talks about how each of those ladies really had a special talent in mathematics, and how they utilize that talent to you know, accomplish their goal. And so after reading that this story with these students, they got to create their own superpowers, or say what their superhero powers were. And so you know, I love this, the amazing Jack, right? Isn't that cute? But if you see, he never gives up. And then Ivani says he makes sense of problems and uses tools to help them. So it was just a really neat way that, for the teacher said, gosh, what another great activity. Took, again, 15 minutes. And just getting to see where students felt their strengths were, and then they could build on those strengths. The coolest thing is walking down the hallway and seeing all of these, because every team on every classroom on this team did this activity, and they posted these superhero pictures outside their room. So it was just so cool to walk down and see all these students and feel like, gosh, I'm really good at math, and this is what I'm really good at math. I think about my own experience, and that was so different, because I always thought about what I wasn't good at, and I wasn't good at math. So kind of fun activities to do. Lots of other activities in terms of getting to know students. I just shared this again because I think it's so sweet. You know, a little boy put, I can't do it, but I try, I got this. So those messages and those different things always come up in places that you might not recognize. Other activities might breed some of the, you know, gosh, I really learned about my students. Lots of fun things to do to foster that identity. So the next one is about building community. And community is really a collection of all those little unique identities, right? So that they come together and can either work together or work against each other. They can be destructive. And so we've got to really be intentional about how we work together and build this community in a classroom. It has to be built and maintained. It doesn't just happen overnight, right? Or it doesn't just happen magically. There's some intentional things that we do as teachers to get it off the ground and to sustain that. And then communities have these common understandings or common agreements. Even though we haven't all had the same experiences, we can come together and say, this is really important in our community, and we're going to hold each other to that. And so those are those whole ideas of norms for productive struggle. And we're going to dive into this in just a minute. But we have to remember that norms are created, reinforced, and updated. So we're going to create those together. We're going to reinforce them throughout our actions and celebrating, oh gosh, I see that Lenny did that. That was great. That really helped our community and helped us all learn and grow. And we may have to update them as over time as things change. So a lot of us have these classroom rules or posters, right? And just kind of a list of things that we expect from each other in terms of just how our classroom operates. Well, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of time to go in. And I'm going to have to get my link here. I want you to start to think about what might be some math community norms that you would want to establish, or that you do establish within your classroom. I thought it'd be fun to kind of come together, because we might kind of push each other's thinking and come up with things that we might not have anticipated on our own. So what I'm going to have you do, and we're going to do this for 5 minutes. And you know what, Stephanie, maybe we should just send a quick chat with 4 minutes left, because it did feel kind of abrupt, and that was my fault, because I wanted to get everybody back. But so we're going to put you in breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. What I'm going to do here is I've got a Google Doc. And so I'm going to put this in the chat. And then what I'm going to ask that you do is that you can go in that Google Doc find a new page or a new, Google Doc. There should be enough in there that so each group has their own, and just start typing some of those things you come up with. So it'll just be a brainstorming list of norms that you might think that would be important for a mathematical community. And then you can kind of talk about those 3 questions as well. And I'll put those actually, and those are on the first slide, so you can go into that Google Doc. So hopefully it works. I'm going to cross my fingers, and Stephanie's going to work some magic, and we'll see you back in about 5 minutes.
Susie, how long of a countdown do you want?
Well, maybe just like a minute left. Like, so at 4 minutes, give them a little
4.
alert and says, yeah, we're going to close it in a minute. That's okay.
Perfect. Okay.
Perfect.
We'll go
All
ahead
right.
and open those rooms.
And I was sharing with my group that we will that somehow we will make sure these Google Doc links are somewhere so that you can go back and look at what everybody else has kind of come up with, because I know our group I didn't come up with any great ideas, but Jamie and Rachel sure did. So but just, I think these are things to really think about, and again, be very intentional about building this community over time and fostering it, and it's really going to be to our benefit. So I just share a couple ideas from the book that where these common agreements, and how we can maybe utilize them, because they're such a healthy part of a community where productive struggle is valued. And so classrooms might begin each day by reciting these agreements, like, this is just what we do, this is how we operate. So this is an example from a classroom in here in Lincoln. And a lot of these behaviors we were talking about were like talked about, or like, this is how we treat each other, or this is what mathematicians do. And the teacher started to highlight those over time and just kind of bring those to the surface and showcase them. And then did a quick little mini lesson with our students and said, hey, what do good mathematicians do? What have we learned over the past couple of weeks? And they came up with this long laundry list of things. And so whittled it down and to kind of some big ideas or themes, and then took pictures of her students. And then this is the pledge that they recite every day. And I think, and I know these are really small, but it says, today we will help each other, ask questions, think, learn from our mistakes, and use lots of strategies. What's fun is there's this teacher has seen themes over across the few years that she's done this, but also that each little group comes up with their own unique kind of ideas and ways of putting those ideas down on paper. So older students might use that same kind of idea, like a pledge in a folder or listed in a notebook, and referring to those periodically, and engage in conversations, or even pulling them out and say, hey, today is closure. What did we notice about our classroom community? And just having that quick conversation. One of my favorite activities I wanted to share is this whole idea of having some analogies and thinking really about struggle in the classroom. And so thinking about and building this community, like, I think struggle is like this because, I've done this in quite a few classrooms, and it's fun because they'll say things like this. I think struggle is like climbing this rock. I know it's hard to see here, but because we use tools to help us when we get stuck. I think struggle is like the ducks because it's hard when I'm struggling and others are watching. I think struggle is like the mama bird because my teacher sometimes comes and helps me and gives me hints. And so I thought those are some really wonderful things that they start to make those analogies, and those come and they come from, that comes from second grade mouths, right? And brains. And so they're able to do that. So coming back and thinking about those, even putting those pictures in the classroom really kind of shows, hey, we are a community that values struggle, and it's okay. So there's not a prescribed way to build community, and each of your communities are going to be unique, although there's going to share some common characteristics. But remember, it's built and strengthened over time. And it takes that intentionality on our part to really build this kind of community where students feel safe and feel respected and feel that struggle is important. So can we plan for struggle? What does it mean to plan for struggle? Well, like I said earlier, and as I started, I didn't really think we could plan for struggle. I thought it was just like one of those in the moment, like aha learning opportunities. Rather, I just really had to be armed and ready for when it happened, right? And so like, okay, I hope struggle happens today. I'm gonna be ready for it. But I've learned over time that there's actually things that we can do to plan for lessons that evoke struggle. So, in addition to those things that we all do, we identify a goal or our, a performance goal for our students, what we want them to do in our instructional goal, like what we really want those students to get out of the lesson. We select a task, we kind of think about how that's going to roll out, and then we think about our closure. However, planning for struggle really incorporates other considerations in the process, that what students might do, what they might struggle with, and what we can do in that response. It really is going to help us be better prepared to respond and support struggle intentionally and in that moment, which we'll talk about in Action 5. I just share this again because the important piece of planning process is task selection. I know in Lincoln Public Schools, we're very lucky. We have a robust curriculum that has some wonderful tasks. However, I know there are people around the country or even around maybe Nebraska that don't have that curriculum or have to go look elsewhere for tasks, or even really think about tasks and how they implement those. And these tasks are called good tasks, rich tasks, worthwhile tasks. If you read in math education literature, there are all kinds of names for them. But whatever they are, they really have that greater potential for student learning and for struggle. So I share this by Stein and Lane. This is a really good example of the research indicates that a task quality may be the most important component of teaching mathematics. So when we have a high quality task and we implement that in a very high way in terms of student thinking and understanding, there's high results in relation to student learning, right? So the results are really high. Notice here, even if we have a low task, even if we implement it at the highest of level, like rock star, implementation, the results is really still low. So the results for low task, even with good teaching, it reveals that great teaching does not overcome bad tasks necessarily. So having high quality tasks matter. So I share this. This is actually a tool from that John Sangiovanni, one of my co-authors, wrote in a different book. He writes all kinds of books, and there's so many great things. So if you're ever looking for a good book, look for his name. But what he did was he came up with a kind of a tool to help us identify what high quality tasks are, or does it align to the math? So there's this list here. Does it does it align to the math content standards? Does it encourage students to use representations? Does it have multiple entry points? So all those things, even if I think about the task maybe I have, then how might I implement it? That's what you can kind of go through this checklist to decide, is this a high quality task or not? If you're interested in this, I can sure share a bigger example. So we're going to just go through a quick few tasks together, and just to kind of give us a better idea. So this task on the left is one we typically see, right? Students are just filling in numbers on a hundreds chart. If we take some of those things and we think about the task on the right, it's kind of tweaked, right? So it's not a major overhaul, but it's changed slightly. It's been modified to raise the rigor, and now there's an opportunity for struggle when presented in the appropriate way. So I know I share this all the time. We as teachers, we modify things all the time. We modify how students, line up. We modify games for students are playing. We modify the names in a word problem, or restructure lessons to increase engagement. So one of those most important modifications that we can do on a daily basis is think about how we modify those tasks to make them even more kind of ready for struggle, right? So a couple other quick examples, and I'm just going to move through this part quickly because I want you to have some time to talk and some of the next things. So here's another example. Shade 6/10 on the grid, a very count and color activity. Doesn't take a lot of student thinking. They kind of have to know, oh gosh, I have to maybe do 6 of those lines, and they've got it. But when you change that just so slightly, shade the grid in 3 different ways to show 6/10 and explain how you know each of those is 6/10. That's where that conversation comes up. There's a little bit of struggle, right? And really have to think about, get into that deeper idea of place value and thinking. Here's one just for example for kindergartners. There's often we see kindergarten things and tasks in like count 8 elephants and then write the number 8. Perhaps we could revise the task and reverse it. So you could say, gosh, here's the number. How else could you show or represent this number? you know what? That really gets kids thinking and struggling, right? They're thinking about, well, I could do this with circles. I could do it with fingers, toes, 4+4, cubes. I could show 2 dice that have 4 on each, 4 pips on each side. I could make a 5 group and 3 more. So again, there's that struggle piece in there of not just having to kind of, it's not so focused on the process and the answer, but there's that thinking involved and really thinking more deeply about that idea. Here's another one. We all ask students agree or disagree, right? So we can say color all the rectangles, or we could say, gosh, Jimmy says both of these shapes are rectangles. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Great conversation. This can be a modification that's very easily done with lots of tasks. And young students can kind of do this thumbs up, thumbs down, and talk to your neighbor. And it just really gets students to really at a deeper level in thinking about that. There's variations of agree or disagree. You might show a mistake with a student and say, do you agree or disagree with this work? This is a great way to also kind of say, hey, mistakes are an okay thing, and we learn from our mistakes. And so another great example of a task. The most important thing to think about these tasks is that good tasks don't have to be complicated, right? So here's an example. Can you show that 37 in 3 different ways with base 10 blocks? It's how that task is implemented and what that really gets that student thinking and that opportunities for struggle. So went through that pretty quickly because I think that's something, like I said, that you're all pretty familiar with, and we can chat more about that, but I want to get more into this whole idea of supporting struggle. So this is the next action. What do we do in the moment as teachers so to support struggle and not take over or not rescue? I know that's hard. That was hard for me. I was that rescuer. I wanted to come in and swoop in and say, oh, sweetie, I'll help you. Don't worry, we'll get through this together. However, I didn't quite have those tools. So what I'm going to ask we're going to do, we're going to spend about, I think we're going to say maybe 13 minutes, Stephanie, or maybe 12 to 13 minutes. We'll kind of see how that's going. And I will be better about the chat this time. But I've got a vignette that I'm going to put in the chat box. Maybe if I can find my chat box. And then what I'm going to ask that you do is I'm going to ask that you read this. We'll kind of maybe send you to your breakout rooms. So hopefully everybody can go to that Google Doc and read this vignette about Miss Kim and Mr. Lowry. And this is a 2nd grade classroom where students are really trying to unpack Tyler's strategy that you see on the screen, and also see if then that strategy would be applicable to solving a new problem of 116 minus 37. So this vignette, I think, is going to give us an idea of how we might a better picture of how we might support struggle. And then, so like I said, we're going to go to the breakout rooms, and then let me just show you the next screen. I will put these next. Then after you read, I want you to think about these 2 questions and you can have that discussion, and then hopefully we'll kind of navigate, and that should be enough time for you. And then Stephanie, we'll kind of gauge if it's a little bit too much time, we'll give people a heads up, and I will be better about answering your chat this time. So, all right. So everybody kind of got what we're gonna do this time. All right. So hopefully you can find that Google Doc, and I will put these in the chat. These questions, so you've got both of them.
Okay, so we'll do breakout for 12 minutes.
Let's do 12 minutes. Yep.
1 minute callback, and let me know if we need to shorten that.
Perfect. We'll do that. Thank you.
Open this. We have about 5 people left to rejoin. Yeah.
I may not get to my last one. Shoot, but that's okay.
Okay, we're all back.
Okay, we're all back. Okay, awesome. Sorry, it's hard to judge. I was a little long, but we got it. And hopefully you had a good discussion. I know I could really relate to, I was a Miss Kim when I was in that classroom, and I'm hoping to become more of a Mr. Lowry, but just kind of those different things. So that was an example of this whole idea of catch and release. If you notice that kind of Mr. Lowry posed a question, kind of let the kids start to work, but then notice they need to come back and have a collective conversation. So kind of caught them and brought them back, had some good conversation, gave them some tools and ideas to go back, and then kind of released them again. That whole fishing idea of catch and release. But I really like this idea and this kind of move that we can make as teachers to help identify or to help evoke productive struggle. So we're not going to have time to go through this, but if you have the book, there's a chart that really talks about these questions. And Mr. Lowry posed that question, what do you know about this problem? And it really moved, it was a great move that rescued the thinking, but didn't tell the answer like what Miss Kim did. She really rescued the answer while Mr. Lowry rescued the thinking. And so there's some different kind of examples here, pros and cons. And sometimes those questions are going to work better than others, right? And sometimes there's times that you just have to come and say, hey, you know what, draw 5 circles here and then keep going. But this is just kind of some tools for you. Like I said, we'll have this in the slides. You can look at that, but I think there's just some great questions, and I know teachers are really appreciative of having some more things in their toolbox to ask when students get stuck. Another way is this whole idea of referrals and referring students to a chart or having them kind of use a graphic organizer. Here is an example of a real simplistic one, like how is this like a problem you've done before and how is it different? Sometimes kids just need to think a little bit differently or kind of change course in their thinking to help them kind of get jump started and to get back on track. I know this was Michelle Homp's favorite strategy, like what has to be wrong? Sometimes as teachers, we walk in and when students are stuck, we're like, well, what has to be wrong? Even a kindergartner can say, I know 0 has to be wrong for that addition problem, right? And it kind of evokes what else might be wrong or what could be right and correct. And so lots of fun things we can do to put the thinking back on the students. So the last action, here we are, we only have a few minutes left, but it's about reflecting on struggle. It's really important to have closure of a lesson. And I would argue that it doesn't always have to be about the content. It can be about what we do today, about our math community and our struggle. You might ask students to do some reflecting. Today, when you struggled, I knew to ask this, or what was okay, or, Cindy, can you share today what happened to you when you got stuck and what you did to get unstuck? I think those are great things, and to celebrate those actions in the classroom. I love this one. Like today, math was like the 3 Goldilocks, right? It was too hard, too easy, or just right, and why. I love these analogies. Like math today was like a baseball game because, and they could talk. And there's so many great things that students come up with. And you can also revisit those questions, those images, right? About, gosh, today I felt like the elephant because I couldn't do it, but I kept trying. So just again, revisiting and looping back and having those conversations are going to just make that productive struggle part of that classroom community. And then taking time to struggle, right? Lots of kind of things, those little shout outs, those little things. I love this one, like you rock, and I rock at struggle, and putting their name up on the board. So lots of fun things to do just to showcase students and to celebrate. So I went through things lots really quickly and kind of got to dive in tonight. Couple things that I will add to the chat, or give you access. I'm not sure how we'll figure it out, but we'll send it. Maybe I'll just send it to all you. But if you have the book, this Productive Struggle Self-Inventory is in there. If you don't, I will share it with you. But I'd encourage you to take this Productive Struggle Inventory and just kind of see where you lie if you're really interested in moving forward, and then say, gosh, where's an area that I want to kind of push the needle and I want to get better at. You could also encourage colleagues to do this. I know one team did it together, and then they collectively came up with what do we want to work on, and they've been doing kind of those things. Really quick, I just want to put a shout out. This is a book that Karen Karp and Sarah Bush and Barb Doherty wrote that just came out. It's about everybody's on the same page. So it's like there's cohesion within a context. So like, for example, we're all going to really say we're not going to use that bigger bottom, better borrow. We're not going to use those tricks anymore. We're going to use really and talk about regrouping when we teach double-digit subtraction. So in that whole idea of this book, I would argue that same idea goes for productive struggles. Do we all believe, and do all of our actions support those beliefs within a building or even within a team? So there's some things that you can kind of, and I wanted to have another breakout, but we're at 8 o'clock. And so I want to wrap this up. But this whole idea of shifting from productive to from unproductive to productive beliefs about struggle, and really thinking about and having those conversations. So this might be a tool for you to use as you have and kind of spark some of those conversations in your classrooms and or buildings or contexts. So there's lots of those, and lots of things that you can probably relate to, and I think that it will evoke some great conversations. So this was going to be our last breakout, but I want you, it's kind of food for thought. I want you to leave and reflect on this. How do we get others on the bus in terms of productive struggle? the lots of different things, and just how can you invite others to kind of join you on that journey. So if you have some great ideas, I'd love to hear them, and you'll have my email. So thanks for hanging out tonight again. It was kind of fun to be able to kind of go back and forth, and thanks for helping us navigate. It's always you kind of trying to figure out what good timing is and all that idea of breakouts. But hopefully you got to think a little bit more deeply about the 6 actions and maybe started to spark some ideas about your own work and things that you're going to do, or maybe things that you might change and do differently. So if you want to reach out to me, there's my email. You know where to find me. So thanks again. And just remember, math rocks, especially when there's productive struggle. So thanks for all of you, and enjoyed having you, and wish we could have been in person, but that just doesn't happen in today's world anyway, but let alone we're across Nebraska. But it was great to see all your faces and be with you tonight. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Susie. It looks like we don't have questions in the chat, but we did have Lenny post some information about math strat chat there, and some interesting information in a link there.
Oh, cool.
A lot of thank yous, a lot of happy attendees.
Yeah, awesome.
I would
Thank
just
you so
throw
much.
out that math strat chat is really interesting, and I posted a link to the past problems, but every Wednesday night she posts a problem, and then teachers find different ways to solve it, and it's subtraction, addition, multiplication, division. It's amazing the number of ways they come up to solve problems, and it's really kind of opened my eyes to understanding different ways that you can do problems.
Lenny, can I ask, is that for teachers to solve, or do they go and take it to students to solve?
It is for teacher. The Twitter is for teachers, or the hashtag. But if you go on to the site, the past problems, I think you could do it as an activity in your class. You could just put it up. I thought of using it as a bulletin board type of thing, where you put it up and then have students post different ways they solve it. Because what I like is that it really encourages alternate ways to solve problems. So instead of doing a problem once and moving on, it's doing a problem, doing it a different way, and understanding what you're doing. It really focuses on understanding. And awesome. Pam Harris has, it's Math is Figure Outable is her website. She has a lot of good things there, as well as Christina Trondevold's another one who I like to listen to.
Yeah, Christina's good too. Yeah, well, I was just thinking that little boy that says he's bored, Melanie, we got to get him some of those problems, those emojis. I'll have to share it with this teacher. Thanks for sharing. It's always great to get, new ideas and lots of stuff out there. There's so much, it's like so much information. It's like hard trying to find it. And that's the hard part anymore, is trying to land on all the good stuff. So thanks for doing that. So great to see all of you. It was, like I said, it was fun to see all your faces, and enjoyed being with you. So